We have seen that economy has taken a breather for last 1.5 years, and it could be as simple as a trade deal going through, or it could be just earning estimates going upwards.
And it is important to keep in mind that when thinking about long-term investment strategies, we need to pay more attention on the ये जो अभी 0.9 trillion है, this can go close to 2.4, 2.5 trillion. That's a big number.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining today's session on the gap between projection and reality, an outlook on the new year to 2026. My name is Bijal, and I will be your host for today's session. As we stand at the threshold of 2026, the investment landscape continues to evolve faster than traditional forecast can sometimes capture. The past year has once again reminded us that while projections provide direction, real world outcome often unfold with their own momentum, shaped by economic cycle, geopolitical shifts, technological disruptions, and investor behavior. In this session, we will explore where expectations aligned with reality, where they diverge, and what these gaps tell us about the opportunities and challenges ahead. Our goal is to equip you with the grounded and insightful perspective on the year 2026, empowering you to navigate markets with clarity, caution, and confidence. With me, I have two senior fund managers, Mr. Ketan Gujarathi and Sneha Pandey. I now invite Sneha to begin her part of the presentations.
Thank you, Bijal. Hello and welcome, everyone. So, forecasting is an integral part of the financial world. So, in a world filled with uncertainty, constant changes, these predictions is what helps us make more sense of the future. Whether it's projecting interest rates, predicting economic growth, or estimating your corporate profits, forecasts are the backbone of decision making for investors, policymakers, and businesses alike. Now, they allow us to prepare for potential outcomes and manage risks accordingly. हम सबको लगता है कि अगर हमें आइडिया हो कि आगे क्या हो सकता है तो हम शायद बेटर डिसीजन ले सकते हैं, राइट? बट हियर्स द ट्विस्ट, द forecasting isn't really foolproof. Forecasting isn't an exact science. It's about seeing the future, but it is not with a crystal clear precision. It's about making informed guesses based on the best available data and assumptions at the given in the given scenario or at the given moment. So financial forecast, although they're important, they're inherently fallible. The variables that we are trying to forecast, like your stock market, interest rates, inflation, all of these are affected by countless factors, many of which are beyond anyone's control. And in reality, the future often throws curveballs. Unexpected events like, say, your geopolitical shocks, your financial crisis, or even your global financial crisis that we just saw in the past, pandemics for that matter, all of these can turn your predictions upside down. But just because your forecasts are sometimes, like, they sometimes fail, it does not really mean they're useless. ये सिर्फ ये दिखाता है कि predictions fallible हैं and that they're imperfect. And today we'll explore some major events in the history where these big predictions or where the market's expectations or experts' ke expectations went wrong, why they failed, and what did we learn from them. So let's take a quick walk through some of the significant historical events where predictions were wildly off, and let's see why they failed. So, starting with 1973-74, we saw an oil shock which led to a global market crash. The expectation was that the oil supply will remain more or less stable and inflation would be manageable. But in reality, the OPEC's oil embargo that really caused a massive spike in prices, leading to global recession and stock market crash. Why did it fail? Because the prediction or expectation, they underestimated the geopolitical risk, and they didn't foresee the instability in the Middle East and how it would shake up the entire global oil supply. So, which was once perceived to be like a stable oil market, that completely turned into a major global crisis within a blink of an eye. Then in 1987, we had the Black Monday. Here, the expectation was that there would be a small correction in the market and it is nothing too big. But in reality, the markets crashed by 22% in just one day. And why did this fail? Because all the new financial tools like your portfolio insurance, computerized trading, all of these just backfired. Instead of protecting against losses, they amplified them, triggering an avalanche of selling. तो नुकसान से बचने के बजाय ये टूल्स ने लॉसेस को और भी बढ़ा दिया, जैसे एक स्नोबॉल बन गया और जो हर चीज को अपने साथ लेकर जाने लग गया उसके बाद. एंड what was supposed to be a small correction turned into a global financial panic. Similarly, in 1997, we saw the Asian financial crisis, and here also the risk was hidden. The countries had taken massive debt, and the currency was actually pegged. The currency pegs were more or less unstable. बहुत सारी ऐसी एशियन कंट्रीज थी जिन्होंने अपनी करेंसीज को एक फिक्स्ड वैल्यू पे यूएस डॉलर के साथ पेग कर दिया. मतलब उनका करेंसी वैल्यू डॉलर के साथ लिंक था, लेकिन इन कंट्रीज ने बहुत ही ज्यादा डेट लेके रखा था जो अनसस्टेनेबल था. जैसे ही कैपिटल आउटफ्लो शुरू हुए और फॉरेन इन्वेस्टर्स ने अपना इन्वेस्टमेंट वापस लेना शुरू कर दिया, तो ये कंट्रीज अपने करेंसी को डिफेंड नहीं कर पा रही थी. ये डेट बर्डन और करेंसी पेक्स का प्रेशर एक पॉइंट के बाद अनबेरेबल हो गया, जिससे उनकी इकोनॉमीज कोलैप्स हो गई. इन्वेस्टर्स missed the cracks beneath the surface, which led to a massive crisis. Moving on. In 2000, we had the dot-com bubble burst. Now, here the prediction was that the internet would just justify all the endless valuations. NASDAQ, but in reality, NASDAQ really lost what? 80% of its value, and many dot-com companies just collapsed. Why did it fail? Because investors here, they ignored the lack of real profit behind the hype. They assumed that if the internet, that this internet would just justify the sky high valuations. But when earnings did not follow, the markets crashed. यहाँ गलती बेसिकली ये थी इन्वेस्टर्स की कि ये सब हाइप के पीछे दौड़ना शुरू हो गए थे. तो बिना ये समझे कि जो इंटरनेट कंपनीज मार्केट में आ रही हैं उनके पास रियल प्रॉफिट्स है भी या नहीं, ये किसी ने सोचा ही नहीं. सबने सोचा कि इंटरनेट का फ्यूचर तो इतना बड़ा होगा कि हर कंपनी वैल्यूएशन अपने आप जस्टिफाई हो जाएगा. पर जब अर्निंग्स एक्चुअली में नहीं आए, जब व्हेन इट स्टॉप्ड कमिंग, व्हेन दे वर नॉट विजिबल एनीमोर, तो मार्केट का ये बबल फट गया एंड मार्केट्स कोलैप्स्ड. Similarly, in 2007 and 2008, we had the global financial crisis. We call it that this was the subprime mortgage crisis. So here also the prediction was that this is going to be more or less contained. It's not going to be too big. All the banks are assumed to be too big to be failed. But in reality, what happened was this entire housing market collapsed. It triggered a global financial meltdown because बैंक्स ने अपने रिस्क को मिसप्राइस किया हुआ था. बैंक्स मिसप्राइस देयर रिस्क एंड रेगुलेटर्स दे अंडर एस्टिमेटेड द सिस्टेमिक इम्पैक्ट. एक चीज दूसरे को कैसे इम्पैक्ट कर रही है, ये एस्टिमेशन में बहुत ज्यादा अंडर एस्टिमेशन हुआ था. What seemed like a small problem in subprime mortgages, it spiraled into a global economic disaster. And lastly, the 2020 COVID crash. Expectation here was that pandemic would have a very limited impact on the global economy. But in reality, the virus spread globally, causing economies to shut down and stock markets just plummeted. Why did this fail? Here, what was the problem? The scale and speed of the pandemic was massively underestimated. No one anticipated in the world that that we would go into a lockdown, that industries would suddenly freeze. ये nobody किसी ने सोचा ही नहीं था. The economy shock was much bigger than anyone would have imagined. सबने पैंडेमिक के स्केल को, उसकी स्पीड को, सबको अंडर एस्टिमेट किया. किसी ने ये नहीं सोचा कि दुनिया भर के या इतने सारे देश लॉकडाउन में चले जाएंगे या इंडस्ट्रीज एकदम से फ्रीज हो जाएंगे. But just because predictions fail, just because they fail, it does not mean they are useless. ये सिर्फ ये बताता है कि फोरकास्टिंग हमेशा सही नहीं होता, बट दिस डज नॉट इवन टेल कि फोरकास्टिंग हमेशा ही गलत होता है. इट जस्ट मीन्स दैट वी आर वर्किंग विथ एन इम्परफेक्ट इंफॉर्मेशन. कि ये जो प्रेडिक्शंस है एंड वॉट एवर वी आर ट्राइंग टू डू, इसमें इंफॉर्मेशन एसिमेट्री है. मे बी हमारे पास सारी इंफॉर्मेशन अवेलेबल नहीं है, विच इज वाई वी आर नॉट एबल टू प्रेडिक्ट इट एक्यूरेटली. So predictions are technically our attempt to chart the course through an unpredictable future, and it is not a guarantee. So despite all the misses, forecasting still gives us a way to understand the potential trends to make decision in this uncertain world. Moving on. So now that we've walked through some of the biggest forecasting misses in history, let's talk about something that we all deal with every year. So, forecasting for the year ahead. Now, you've probably noticed as we are approaching the end of the year, your WhatsApp is probably flooded with all sorts of outlooks for 2026. Everyone's got their predictions ready, and I mean everyone. Even Ruchir Sharma, one of the most respected voices in the global finance, he releases his predictions around this time. But here's the thing, predictions, even from the best, they often do not really hold up. Say Ruchir Sharma, for example, he has made some very bold calls in the past, but not all of them have panned out. Like let's say in his 2018 ka book, I think Rise and Fall of Nations. So there he predicted that India's growth will outpace China, and in the next decade, India will become the world's fastest growing major economy. I agree, India is currently the fastest growing major economy, but it hasn't outpaced China. Not purely in terms of growth, but India has been unable to surpass China. Fast forward it to say 2020, in today's in this entire India's economy when it was hit by COVID-19 pandemic. This led to an unprecedented contraction. I mean, in the hindsight, that prediction did not quite materialize in the short run. So, it did not really materialize as much. जो उसे प्रेडिक्ट किया था वो 2020 के कोविड डिसरप्शन के वजह से वी डिड नॉट रियली स्टैंड ट्रू टू हिज प्रेडिक्शन. Take his forecast back in 2015. Now, he called for a surge in oil prices due to supply constraints. But instead, we saw oil prices, they continued to decline. So it is clear that even the best minds, they can miss the mark when it comes to short-term predictions. And I think deep down, we all know this. We have seen it time and again. So the real takeaway from all of this is short-term forecasts are inaccurate. Whether it is Ruchit Sharma or RBI for that matter, even the most experienced analysts often miss their targets in the near term. So if you look at the charts here, I'm trying to tell you what, say RBI ka GDP forecast, for example. Over the last 16 years, the RBI has actually been pretty much accurate, but only 5 out of 16 times. Even the RBI, which has access to vast amounts of data and analysis, still misses the mark quite often. It, in fact, during the periods of your expansion, economic expansion, RBI has consistently under forecasted India's growth. They have been too cautious during good years. And on the flip side, during shocks, like say in 2019 or the 2020 crash, they have over forecasted the growth. These are real time shocks that generally throw off your predictions. So why? Why does this happen? Because forecasting is actually tricky. It's hard to predict what's going to happen in the short term, because markets and economies can be affected by 1,000 different things, most of which are unpredictable. So, take inflation for example. This is even harder to forecast. The RBI's track record here is a bit messier. Inflation forecasts tend to be a lot more volatile, especially during good times or during energy shocks. So if you look at the data from 2010 to 2025, you'll see that the RBI consistently under forecasted inflation during periods of high food and high energy prices, which are the two major drivers of inflation in India. So, food and energy are the major contributors to your inflation basket. So, and if you look at it, on the other hand, during times of stability, they tend to under forecast inflation. So this is a classic example why inflation forecast is noisy. I mean, near term forecast, because inflation we look at it on a very near term basis. So why near term forecasting is very noisy, it is unpredictable due to some real time shocks like any global commodity price swings or any weather patterns. They make all of these accuracy very difficult. Next slide, please. Yeah. So, but here there is a silver lining. So GDP forecasting errors tend to cancel out over time. So when you zoom out and you look at the long-term trend, they remain relatively stable. For example, here over a period of 15 years, despite the mistakes of your yearly predictions, the forecast still points out that India's structurally high in its growth path. So while short-term forecast might be a hit or a miss, in the long run, the trend is pretty much consistent. The long-term growth trajectory, it generally remains intact. So why are these long-term trends holding true? And short term trends are not really that great in terms of forecast. ऐसा क्या है जो लॉन्ग टर्म में काम कर रहा है बट शॉर्ट टर्म प्रेडिक्शंस फेल हो जाते हैं? See, the thing is कि economies and markets now they are driven by structural forces. In India, for example, long-term growth का trend is supported by factors like demographic growth, urbanization हो गया, technological advancements है, and these are massive, slow-moving but massive forces that don't change overnight. Even if there is volatility in the short term, over a long term, they tend to be generally more stable and directionally positive. So look at India's GDP growth over the last 45 years. Now, despite all the fluctuations, crisis, slowdown, the average growth rate it generally hovers around 6.5%. And yes, we've had slow years. Yes, we've had good years also. But when you look at the long term, the trend is remarkably consistent. And this is true for global GDP also. अगर आप वो ग्लोबल जीडीपी के अक्रॉस भी एक एवरेज लाइन या लॉन्ग टर्म की लाइन ड्रॉ करेंगे, यू विल सी इफ यू जूम आउट यू विल फाइंड अ वेरी सिमिलर पैटर्न, steady growth in the long term but bumps in the along the way. Okay, so now why does this long term trend hold consistently? Because the underlying structural factors like your innovation, labor force ka growth, capital accumulation, they drive the economy in a certain predictable directional way. These factors are too big to be derailed by short term forces. In the long term, they generally deliver. Moving on. And here's why it gets even more interesting. So this long term ka trend does not just apply to GDP. We see it in equities too. If you look at the Nifty 50 over the past decade, its 10-year CAGR has stayed remarkably close to its long-term median, despite the ups and downs in the market. So in fact, if you look at India's equity markets over the last 10 years, you will see that they broadly track the long term trend. Even during major corrections or bear markets, overall long term trajectory has remained intact. So, what this tells us is while short term volatility can be dramatic, long term growth story still holds true. अगर आप इंडिया के इक्विटी मार्केट्स को पिछले 10 सालों में देखें तो आपको यही मिलेगा कि वो लॉन्ग टर्म ट्रेंड को काफी अच्छे से फॉलो कर रहा है, चाहे मेजर करेक्शंस ही क्यों ना आ जाए। ओवरऑल लॉन्ग टर्म ग्रोथ का जो ट्रेंड है वो मोर और लेस इंटैक्ट रहता है। तो now to elaborate more on this, I would like to request my colleague and mentor Ketan to please take the lead.
Hi everyone, welcome. Sneha was talking such interesting stuff. I forgot that I have to jump in now. Anyways, so I also have a story to tell, and like just Sneha mentioned and gave a good foundation that long-term forecasting or long-term predictions have generally worked in the past. And this is another chart which will give you that fascinating story. You can see the India's GDP growth rate over say last 26 years or so, and then you see the EPS growth and then the equity returns. They are moving in tandem. So there is some zigzag in the way, but there have been moving in the tandem. So this is the situation that we have to focus on the right things, and obviously the stock market will follow. Now, moving to the earning estimates. Now, this is something which is very commonly discussed in media, in newspapers, in the reports. We talk about next year earnings, and you look at us. All the analysts put together, we have been getting so wrong on the next year earnings. We start with a very high projections, then the actual earnings turn out to be lower or much higher than what we had started with, and it becomes a real futile thing that we are projecting such short-term earnings. It's better to focus on longer term earnings and link it to more like a structural factor, which Neha discussed, the GDP factor. And that will give you a much more better outcomes because in a long term that has hold true. So we'll see what happened this year. So for example, we were going on a very strong path from the COVID. We recovered very quickly. Returns इतने बढ़िया बन रहे थे, लोगों को लगा अरे ये तो बहुत आसान है, मेरे पास एक 18% रिटर्न लाने वाली एफडी मिल गई है मुझको, which they were completely lost and they were not in the right mind to think of it. And this was the year which actually showed us कि ऐसा नहीं होता है. Equity is a risky product. It will have its ups and downs, and we have to take it in stride. And that is just a feature of the product. It is not a bug, it's the feature. So this year the impact is even worse if you see individual stocks. So if you see this was the list created on 21st November. If you see the number of stocks, more than 50% of the stocks have fallen, let's say more than 20% or so. However, index is not showing any such pain. So आप देखेंगे काफी म्यूचुअल फंड्स के एनएवीज भी या स्टॉक्स भी, दे हैव फॉलन फ्रॉम देयर हाइज. इंडेक्स हाई से नहीं गिरा है, इंडेक्स अभी तक उधर डटा रहा है, but the returns still 1 year returns have been still very low. Now why that has happened, that let's discuss that. तो लास्ट ईयर में हम देखेंगे तो ईपीएस ग्रोथ रेट जो लॉन्ग टर्म में 10 से 12% के आसपास रही है, वो लास्ट ईयर में आई है मात्र 2%, which is 2% over 1 year is a very low EPS growth versus the long term trend we have seen in the past. And this has happened largely from the cyclical factors. So in couple of sectors, you see the cyclical sectors, they have shown a decline in earnings, and it was a sharp decline. And the second is that there was some inflation in some cost inputs to some of the commodities. And that was another reason why there were margin pressures. And that led to a downfall in shortfall in the EPS growth for Nifty. And no wonder market has chugged along in a similar lines, and it has given a 2-3% kind of a return. No, this was the in September 24 when Nifty made high, which we know today now. At that time, this was our internal calculation of the upside potential of our own portfolio, which is Quantum Value Fund. So internally, what we do is in Quantum Value Fund, we hold, let's say, 30 to 31 stocks. We value each of the stocks, and proportionate to the weight of that, we calculate the upside potential of our portfolio, which is a 2 year future upside in absolute terms. So let's say in September of 2014, our upside potential calculation was showing only 10% returns over next 2 years. So what it means is 2 साल में 10% मतलब एक साल सालाना अगर मैं डिवाइड बाय 2 भी करता हूं तो खाली 5% CAGR रिटर्न बनेगा. इस तरीके का अपसाइड पोटेंशियल दिख रहा था हमें. एंड नो वंडर इफ यू सी आर कैश लेवल्स वर इंचिंग अपवर्ड्स. हम देखेंगे कि कैश भी 10 से 15% तक पहुंचा, 18% तक पहुंच गया था. एंड दिस वाज बिकॉज मोर एंड मोर स्टॉक्स वर हिटिंग आवर सेल लिमिट्स, but we were not getting enough opportunities to buy the discounts. And that was the reason why our cash levels went up. Now let's see what that upside potential has been doing over a long term. So just like said, how we come around with upside potential. This has been the upside potential since the inception of our fund. So 2006 May we started our fund. We'll be completing 20 years next year in March. Ever since we started the fund, we started calculating the upside potential of our portfolio stocks 2 years out. तो 2 साल बाद हमारी NAV हमारे हिसाब से क्या रहेगी for internal purposes to showcase to our analyst and to our own research team whether we are doing the right thing or not. एंड ऑरेंज लाइन इंडिकेट्स दैट. सो ऑरेंज लाइन आप देखेंगे लॉन्ग टर्म में हम लोग ने ये 2 साल आगे की हम लोग ने एनएवी अपना कैलकुलेट किया है. और ब्लू लाइन इज द एक्चुअल एनएवी जो आई है हमारी, विच इज द रियल नंबर्स विच वी हैव कम अप विद. तो आप देखेंगे देर इज अ वेरी टाइट knit between these two lines. So what it shows is हम लोग ने जो सोचा, what we thought, we actually, our fund actually delivered that in 2 years time. And that is a very strong signal that our research has worked based on what we wanted from it. So whatever we hoped that our stocks will deliver, they have delivered. Barring there are these 2 periods which are external in nature, जो हमारे कंट्रोल में नहीं है. Those periods you will see that there we obviously couldn't meet the expectations, and that is the nature of equity. We cannot assume that equity will be always bang on at whatever we are expecting from it. So the Lehman crisis और COVID period, ये दो अगर events छोड़ देंगे, बाकी periods में the delivery has been pretty consistent. And this holds us in a good state that our process has been working for us now, and gives us more confidence that we should continue this good work. Now let us think about why this has worked. With all these things we discussed, that it is harder, things can go haywire. But in long term, there are few things which are more structural and they don't change. So now let's see what are those things. One is governance risk. We always talk about governance first. Obviously, your returns will be what you are expecting them to be. Second is you have to study the underlying business. Don't run after fads. You go after businesses, understand them, look at their long-term growth expectations, look at their industry, and then you value them. And now valuations, again, you have to use a long-term metrics for it. You cannot depend on last year's what market was willing to assign the PE to them or what price the IPOs are coming at. You cannot use these measures. You have to focus on the long-term valuations, which is what we do internally. And the other point is how you buy and sell. So buy process is basically we are buying at a 25% discount to fair value and then selling when that stock reaches the fair value. So let me give you an example. So let's say this is December, right? Now आप umbrella use करते हैं. When do you use umbrellas? During the rainy season or monsoon? December में do you think that anyone is buying umbrella? Definitely not. अब वो dealer बेचारा, he is sitting with lot of inventory of umbrellas. He is willing to give me at a discount. He is telling me, sir, it is a 100 rupee umbrella. I am giving it to you for 75 rupees. And as a value investor, I am thinking, okay, umbrella is always going to be required. जून में रेंज चालू हो जाएंगी, आई अगेन नीड दी अम्ब्रेला, सो लेट मी बाय इट एट 75 रुपीज. और जून में जब वापस मार्केट रेंज सीजन चालू हो जाएगा, आई सेल इट फॉर 100. So I am making my 75 to 100, which is like 33% kind of an upside. I'm making from just buying the stocks in their non-seasonal period and selling them in the season. And that's basically what we do. We are following this value investing concept where we are buying at 25% discount and selling it at a fair price. And that holds us in a good stead. So all the mistakes, errors that may happen, they they first of all get nullified in a diversified portfolio, and second, on an aggregate, we are buying at a discount, so it makes sure that we are able to generate a return as well. And this is how we input our numbers when we are modeling the stuff. We don't get excited by some new IPO coming, or we don't get excited by the recent cyclical growth which may not sustain in future. We look at long-term projections and we anchor it to some steady things. Like for example, GDP. Now we saw that GDP has been fairly steady in 6 to 6.5% bracket. Now in that case, isn't it wise to just anchor our forecast based on those structural things rather than getting, just extrapolating the last year's earning growth? Then that is where the confidence in the models come in, and that is where the delivery also happens, that whatever we are saying, it is actually translating into what we have been thinking about. So let's say, just to give you an example, like cement growth in historically also, it has grown at 1.1 to 1.3 times real GDP. And then paints, it has grown 1.5 to 2 times real GDP. Now, if we continue to forecast in this manner, there is a chance that you will get it right on an aggregate basis. And further, when you buy it at a discount, it just ensures that you reach to your hurdle rate of 15% plus kind of a return. And that is what has been seen in our past delivery. Now let's talk about year ahead. FY26, almost 2 quarters or half yearly results have been out, and the results look quite subdued. So you see the earnings growth are likely to be just 8% even this year. And why that has happened? So there are some big sectors in the index, which is say banking and financial services. So if you see the bubble in blue, the biggest bubble, it is the one which has the highest weight in the index. That has grown just 8%, or that is likely to grow at just 8% for entire FY26 year. Then you see the other sectors like IT or even FMCG, they are unlikely to grow at a very high rate this year. And that is why even this year is going to be subdued. And no wonder the markets have been a little jittery and they are not able to, get a reason to go up. And that is what we also believe, that the markets are unlikely to deliver immediate return. But there is a good story ahead. So let's move on to the FY27 estimates. Now, what is going to happen is interesting. FY25, we saw the earnings were poor. There were 2% growth. FY26, again, the growth rate was just 8%. So the analyst expectation is when you have a two bad years, the third year has to be so much better than the long-term average, such that all the 3 year average will be closer to the long-term average. So पहले आपने जो 2% की अर्निंग ग्रोथ देखी FY25 में, 26 में 8% थी, अभी अगर 17-18% के आसपास पहुंचेगी तब जाके एवरेज लगभग 10 से 12% के ग्रोथ रेट के ब्रैकेट में आएगा. एंड दैट्स वेयर आवर ऑप्टिमिज्म एज वेल इज. सो लाइकली वी आर सीइंग दैट बैंक्स, आईटी, एफएमसीजी एंड लॉट ऑफ द स्मॉलर सेक्टर्स, हेल्थ केयर बोलो, कंज्यूमर सर्विसेज बोलो, जैसे इटर्नल हो गया. नाउ व्हाट अबाउट वैल्यूएशंस? अर्निंग ग्रोथ की बात कर दी, अब वैल्यूएशंस की बात करेंगे. तो वैल्यूएशंस में वी आर स्टिल ऑन अ इंडेक्स लेवल, वी आर स्टिल वेरी हाई. आप देखेंगे लॉट ऑफ स्टॉक्स इन द इंडेक्स टुडे आर ट्रेडिंग एट मच हायर देन देयर लॉन्ग टर्म एवरेजेस, एंड सो इज द इंडेक्स. And that is where the importance of stock picking will come in. And that is where we are also trying to find the opportunities which may not be there in the headline index, and maybe we'll find them अराउंड बेसिकली जिसमें वेट शायद इंडेक्स में वो बड़ा वेट नहीं होगा और कम वेट होगा, एंड दैट माई बी ट्रेडिंग एट अ चीपर प्राइस, और दे मे हैव फॉलन हार्डर देन द मार्केट, which we saw that 50% of the stocks have fallen more than 20%. So opportunities are probably outside of the index as well. And this is how the quantum value fund is positioned today. So you can see the quantum value fund in line with where the earnings growth are likely to pan out, number one, and number two, where the valuations are more appealing or compelling to add into, which are closer to long-term average or at a discount to the long-term averages. So we believe at Quantum that financial services, which is majorly insurance and banking. Second, IT services, where again we feel that large cap IT is significantly at a discount to intrinsic value. They are likely to do well in next 2 years, and that is how we are positioned today. All constructing this portfolio gives us an output of how our valuations look in our portfolio. So today, Quantum Value Fund, based on the trailing multiples, we are at 19.8 times PE versus 24 times for BSC 500. And if you see the earnings growth, so just because valuations are low doesn't mean they are not growing companies. The growth rates are more or less very similar. So if you see 2 year EPS CAGR, what the analysts are ascribing to the stocks we own, the consensus estimate is saying that our companies are going to grow at 15.9% CAGR. Now, looking at we have seen that economy has taken a breather for last 1.5 years, but although the long-term factors are still intact. So what are we seeing net on the equity outlook side? Valuations, they are above long-term median, but there are opportunities outside of index. Flows, FII flows have been very bad. They have been redeeming a lot of money and putting money where the stories are stronger as per them. So for example, AI is one of the stories which has been going on for a lot. काफी सारी अर्निंग ग्रोथ, जीडीपी ग्रोथ जो है यूएस की, साउथ कोरिया की, इनमें एआई रिलेटेड स्टॉक्स काफी है. जबकि फैब्रिकेशन बोल लीजिए, या आप डेटा सेंटर लेआउट बोल लीजिए, या शेयर जीपीयू चिप्स जो एनवीडिया बेचती है, those things are getting more earnings growth. So all the money has been going there, and India doesn't have that kind of a direct exposure to AI led growth, and that is the reason why the money has been pulled out of the country. And we are hoping that there are some talks on the trade deal, which is another thing which is stopping FIs from put fresh money into India, even if the valuations become reasonable. We think that if the trade deal goes through, then in that case, FI monies will come back. Number one, or number two, simply that if EPS growth rate starts happening, then FIs can see that fear of missing out and they can jump in anytime, irrespective of valuations. So we have to be cognizant that we don't know how they decide what can move, what will be the catalyst for the stock markets to move higher. It could be as simple as a trade deal going through, or it could be just earning estimates going upwards, and that can move the market very fast. So we just have to be cognizant that whether we are allocated in equities based on our asset allocation, and that will probably take care of whatever the next path for the market is. Earnings, we already discussed that next year is likely to be a better year. Now, what are the risks? So one, obviously, I discussed the tariff impact. Tariff impact has also slowed down a lot of corporate capex of late. So a lot of when we meet companies on ground, they are saying that we are waiting for the capex because we think that there is still no trade deal. And if we don't have that kind of export opportunities, why should we rush for the capex? तो एक चीज जैसे फीडबैक लूप होता है, एक चीज की वजह से दूसरी चीजें भी रुकी हुई है, और पीपल वांट दैट there must be some clarity before they commit a large capex, because these are not small projects. These are 1,000 crore, 10,000 crore to 10,000 crore kind of a project. They don't want to disturb their IRR, उनका return on investment का कुछ metric होता है, तो वो अपना disturb नहीं करेंगे. And that is the reason where we need some relaxation over there. Similarly, household debt थोड़ा elevated है. We believe that this is not a very comfortable level, but we believe that as the growth rate of the GDP continues, household debt as a percentage of GDP will come down. And of late, the RBI has tightened the lending things, so probably debt उतना बढ़ने की गुंजाइश नहीं है. So likely that the debt to GDP will come down for the households. Then delay in private capex, again, same I discussed. Uh, Otherwise, what we still believe is that Indian companies or Indian management, they are pretty agile and they have seen several such cycles. They are very good at understanding. And luckily, India is quite a diversified sector wise. So, for example, if you see many emerging markets, they are highly concentrated in one or two sectors. Like Brazil is concentrated into oil and gas, let's say, then China is concentrated into a lot of manufacturing. But India, that's not the case. We have consumption, we have IT services, we have pharma, we have exports, we have a lot of things. So in that case, then you will be able to take advantage of the diversified growth which India offers. Now I'll talk about gold. So the thing is, I often keep the gold slides later so that I have been an equity analyst, equity fund manager. I Gold is taken has been the talk of the town, and here what has happened is the suddenly all the structural things have come in together all of the sudden. So, for example, not just inflation, which was there in developed economy, which has come back after a long time, which led to a rise in gold prices. There are other issues which have culminated to a even further rally in gold. So there are two or three things which have majorly happened in recent past. One is obviously the inflation, which has been quite sticky globally. Developed markets have not seen that kind of inflation for really long time now. So gold is obviously a good hedge against inflation, so it is doing well, number one. Number two, the fiscal deficits or debt to GDP of these developed countries, especially US as well, it has gone to a level which is looks very elevated. So the risk of that debt has become so high that people want to diversify their assets into something like gold. Then third thing, that this tariff uncertainty has suddenly questioned the whole globalization of sorts, that whether this globalization is still relevant, or we have to change our whole supply chain and our thinking around how to go about our doing our economy or running our businesses. And another thing is that where Donald Trump had recently passed froze the assets of Russian government, wherein they said that all your dollar assets, you will not be able to have access to that. So there are some countries, including China, which think that their assets in a dollar denominated bonds is not safe anymore, and it can have any implications if the talks or negotiations go either way. So they are also thinking of diversifying their assets and their reserves into gold reserves. So these are some key reasons why gold has been doing well. And we believe that going forward as well, gold is likely to do better. Now let's see how the gold bull market have been. So the starting point is the low point of the gold when the gold made low. So in this case, let's say let's focus on the light blue, the sky blue line. In that case, if you see this from 2015, the gold made the low. From there till September of 26, the gold has increased only 300%. So 200%. So in a way, we are still not at that kind of a tail end of the rally. We have seen much bigger bull markets in gold in the past, so we feel that here also their excesses are not yet in there, so there is still room for gold to run. Then there are some structural reasons. So I already discussed few of them, but I think that these reasons are so big and so slow moving, and they'll continue to move in that direction. For example, when I said diversifying the reserve currency, so someone wants to sell some of the dollars and move money to gold, or the debt ratio of US or even developed countries, it is not going to overnight come down, and that risk is always there. So those things are going to be very supportive for gold to move up even in next years. Although one can question whether the steepness of rally will be similar, it might be a moderate down. It can fall 10% from here, but we feel that structurally it can give a very reasonable return. And if you have a diversified portfolio, gold can be a very good addition to that. So you can always advise the clients to have some allocation to gold. We typically mention 10 to 20% of allocation to gold. So you can accordingly communicate, because that allocation improves the standard deviation of the portfolio as well, and also helps you get benefit of the returns from the gold. Now, we already discussed that what are the typical structural reasons why gold has been doing well and likely to do well even in future. We still believe that gold ETF offers a better way to invest in gold because it takes away a lot of issues of storage, of quality, and quantum AMC offers gold ETF, which is more focuses on purity. We are one of the fund houses which actually goes and does a purity test for the third party auditor, and that's what we are willing to offer, that we are offering this kind of a service where we are taking a good care of your asset, and we are taking a regular checks on it and visiting the vault from time to time. And these are the things which we feel that we are doing differently and unique in nature versus our peers, and that's what should give you some confidence that why you should invest with us in gold. Now, gold faces some headwinds as well. So what are those headwinds? That if there are some relaxations on the tariff side, or if the tone how US uses with other countries that softens, those things can cool off the rally in gold. So this is one of the thing. Then second is that the rising interest, the restored confidence in US economy. So US economy threw up the uncertainty this year, and that led to rally in gold. तो शायद अगर इसमें confidence वापस आ जाता है, तो maybe the gold will start selling off, because now those stabilities have been in place. Rising interest rate, अभी तो उसकी गुंजाइश थोड़ी कम है. Other than Japan, we have not seen other countries seeing a massive increase in interest rates. Everyone is on their rate cut cycle. So far, that is not a headwind, but it can become a headwind that rising interest rates will cool off the rally in gold. So this is again, it reduces the standard deviation of your portfolio. So gold is obviously a must-have asset according to us. So you can communicate the same with clients. Again, ETF and uh, fund of funds is the best way to go for it. Now I'll just move the conversation again back to Sneha. We'll cover the debt market outlook. Sneha, back to you.
Yeah, thank you, Ketan. So, chalo, now Ketan has briefed you on equity and gold. I'll talk about एक ऐसे एसेट क्लास के बारे में जो हर किसी के पोर्टफोलियो का एक बहुत ही इम्पोर्टेंट एंड एसेंशियल पार्ट है, डेट आउटलुक. So, if you think about it, your debt markets are incredibly interlinked with the broader economy. You can't really talk about one without talking about the other. It's like just like how your stock markets they react to economic trends. The bond market is very closely tied up to the health of the economy, its fiscal policies, and global market dynamics. And what we are seeing right now is even more interesting. Now, we just saw your Q2 FY26 ka GDP numbers. They came at 8.2% in real terms. And your both GDP and GVA, they surprised it on the upside. Slide, please. Yeah. So they surprised you on the upside. So 8.2% GDP growth, 8.1% GVA growth. That is a very strong performance by any standard, especially considering the global headwinds that we have faced this year. Now ये किसी भी स्टैंडर्ड से एक बहुत ही स्ट्रॉन्ग परफॉर्मेंस है, अगर आप कोई भी ग्लोबल हेडविंड्स को कंसिडर कर लो तो द हीरो दैट द हीरो ड्राइवर हियर for this growth was mostly capital formation and private consumption, which is now starting to see to pick up some steam. Now, रियल ग्रोथ का इंजन ना रियल ग्रोथ का ये जो इंजन है फॉर द इकोनॉमी, इट इज primarily coming from businesses investing in infrastructure, machinery, and technology. Like Ketan said, they were hesitant all this while to do a very large capex because they were directionally unclear कि आगे क्या होगा, because they have policy uncertainty. But domestic demand is more or less picking up. It has become very resilient, and which is why all of these will structurally move positive going forward. So the outlook, while not without its challenges, it is still relatively strong for India. Now we are anticipating the Q3 demand to continue its momentum because GST cut September end में अनाउंस हुआ था. उसका का पूरा इम्पैक्ट Q2 में नहीं आया है, वो Q3 में उसका मोमेंटम हमको दिखेगा. And key drivers here are going to be mostly your credit growth. Tax revenues are looking resilient despite of tax cuts, and your auto sector primarily are going. They have shown resilience and momentum so far. सेकेंड हाफ ऑफ द ईयर अगर ओवरऑल देखे H1 H2 को अगर दो बकेट्स में डिवाइड करके देखे, तो H1 हैज ऑलरेडी गिवन यू 8% का रिटर्न, 8% का ग्रोथ. H2 for that matter, second half for that matter, maybe we'll see some slowdown, and we are expecting the growth to moderate somewhere close to 7 to 7.2%. Next slide, please. So now if you zoom out, I give you the near-term perspective. I'm expecting H2 to be at 7 to 7.2%. But if you just zoom out and you look at your long-term, our long-term projections, here we expect the economy and the debt markets to be far more resilient. So your real GDP growth over the next decade is likely expected to be anywhere in the range of 6.5 to 7% on real terms. Then your average CPI, in the past, we have seen the trend to be anywhere between 4 to 5. We anticipate it to be 4 to 4.5% in the long run with some downward biases. Now, your 10-year bond yield also is expected to be in the long run in the range of 6 to 6.5%. And INR ka depreciation in the long run, you can expect it to be not more than or contain to like a 2% ka annual depreciation on rupee on an average. Now, now these are numbers that believe that we believe that are likely going to play out based on the structural factors that are driving the Indian economy. These trends, they hold strong, and it is important to keep in mind that when thinking about long term investment strategies, we need to pay more attention on these structural drivers as well. So moving on. So I've laid the broader foundation of the economy in the long run. And like I said, you cannot talk about debt without talking about the economy. They are two interlinked with each other. So let me brief you a little on what is the current debt market ka landscape. Now we've already seen a 125 basis ka rate cut by the RBI so far this year. But here's the thing, despite of these rate cuts, the 10-year government bond yields have actually moved up almost by say 10 to 15 basis points. So now the curve, although it has steepened, but the longer end of the curve, we have seen it go up. जो लॉन्ग्स हैं वो और ज्यादा ऊपर चले गए हैं. नाउ इस साल आरबीआई ने ऑलरेडी कर दिया 125 बेसिस का रेट कट, बट ये इतने रेट कट के बावजूद भी 10 ईयर बॉन्ड यील्ड्स ऊपर क्यों जा रही है? कर्व स्टीप हो रहा है बट ऊपर क्यों मूव हो रहा है? व्हाई आर यील्ड्स कमिंग डाउन? So now this is actually happening because of some structural problems in the debt market this year. We have seen a demand supply mismatch in the market. Now, especially at the longer end of the curve. Now, what do I mean by that? नाउ सी सप्लाई ऑफ बॉन्ड भले ही उन्होंने लॉन्गर इशुएंस कम कर दिए हैं, मतलब जो 15 ईयर एंड बियॉन्ड के इशुएंसेस है गवर्नमेंट ने उसकी सप्लाई थोड़ी कम कर दी है. सो डिस्पाइट ऑफ लोअर इशुएंसेस इन द लॉन्गर मेच्योरिटीज, demand has become the problem, particularly in the long bonds. They haven't kept up pace with the supply, so naturally yields have gone up. So we saw the spreads, like if you see now, the spreads between the repo rate and various maturity GSEC, they have either exceeded or they're very close to their long term averages. Now, this is something we expect to reverse in the coming months, and the curve will gradually flatten as the demand picks up and supply stabilizes. But it's not just about demand supply dynamics. इस साल, despite of like apart from demand supply dynamics, there were other few factors that have weighed heavily on the bond markets. Now, rupee ka volatility, your fiscal concerns, because GST कट कर दिया तो fiscal deficit expand हो जाएगा, will we able to meet or will not be able to meet, revenue कहाँ से आएगा, तो फिजिकल कंसर्न्स आने लग गए थे. एक्सटर्नल अकाउंट पे अनसर्टेनिटी आने लग गई है बिकॉज ऑफ रुपी वोलेटिलिटी एंड आर इम्पोर्ट डिपेंडेंसी. So now we have create all of this has created some sort of headwinds for your bond markets this year, and these issues have added unpredictability to the market, which has for which the market is now seeking more risk premium. इसके लिए yields ऊपर जा रहे हैं. Next slide please. सो ऑन टॉप ऑफ दिस, स्टेट डेवलपमेंट लोन जो एसडीएल के इशुएंसेस हैं, दे हैव बीन वेरी हाई. सो देखो, 5 ट्रिलियन एसडीएल उन्होंने इशू कर दिया है इन H1 FY 26, विथ इफ यू कंपेयर दैट विथ 3.9 ट्रिलियन इन H1 FY 25. मतलब लास्ट ईयर फर्स्ट हाफ सितंबर तक वो सिर्फ 3.9 ट्रिलियन था, अब 5 ट्रिलियन हो गया. सो looking at this borrowing calendar, we believe is likely going to be heavy in the second half also, because it's primarily driven by state ka fiscal deficit. Now we did the trend analysis, we did some of our internal estimates, and we believe states ka fiscal deficit for some time is likely to be more stretched, and this trend maybe in a year or two we'll continue to see higher issuances from SDL, from the state development loans. We'll keep seeing higher borrowing going forward for the next few years. So what does this mean for the market? Like, if with these increased issuances, the GSEC and SDL ka spread has widened to beyond 65 basis points, and which is almost at its historical high. The reason is simple economics. ज़्यादा सप्लाई होने लग गई जिसकी वजह से प्राइसेस नीचे गिरने लग गए, एंड सिंस बॉन्ड प्राइसेस एंड यील्ड्स आर इनवर्सली रिलेटेड, bonds yield started moving up. So this makes long-term bonds look more attractive and more SDLs look more attractive to investors. So again, buy pressure, prices keep going up, hence yields are likely to come down going forward. ठीक है? तो जब सप्लाई बहुत ज्यादा हो जाए, प्राइसेस नीचे आ जाती हैं क्योंकि बॉन्ड प्राइसेस एंड बॉन्ड यील्ड्स आर इनवर्सली रिलेटेड. मूविंग ऑन. सो नेक्स्ट स्लाइड प्लीज. हेलो.
Yeah.
Slide please. Next slide. Yeah. Sorry. So in my long-term outlook for bonds, so I'm trying to tell you what is still making India bond look very attractive, because like I said, we should not look at the near-term outlook only. We should always look at the long-term outlook. So despite the short-term volatility, there is a strong long-term view for Indian bonds. Here's why. So the RBI has set an ambitious target for itself to, the government has set a very ambitious target for itself to reduce its debt to GDP ratio from 6.7%, 60.7% now, to almost 50% by 2031. What does this mean? Okay, it means that in the long run, we are likely to see reduced bond supply as a percentage of GDP. मतलब फ्यूअर बॉन्ड्स आएंगे इन द मार्केट. अगर डेट कम हो गया तो उसके अगेंस्ट बोरोइंग कम होगी, बोरोइंग कम मतलब सप्लाई कम, इशुएंसेस कम होने लगेंगे. ठीक है. So in the market, this is fewer bonds in the market is likely to put an upward pressure on bond prices, thus lowering bond yields and creating a positive environment for bond markets. Alongside this, we are seeing continued demand from pension and insurance companies and banks, for that matter, who are the largest holder of government bonds, all of which they are vital players in the Indian debt market, and their demand is likely to stay strong as the economy progresses, which is a huge positive for the bond market. Saying lower supply, मतलब मैं बोलना चाहती हूँ कि सप्लाई कम हो जाएगी बिकॉज इंडिया का डेट कम होने लगेगा धीरे धीरे, एंड सप्लाई कम एंड स्टेबल और हायर डिमांड के वजह से आर बॉन्ड यील्ड्स विल कीप कमिंग डाउन. Now, you might be wondering that will India actually be able to achieve this debt to GDP ka target? Now, that's something we'll all have to see. But directionally, India has the potential to achieve this target. Now, if you look at the chart, you'll see post COVID, India has successfully reduced its debt to GDP from, it has been able to reduce its debt to GDP, yeah, from say almost 61% to 56%. Well, most of the other emerging markets have seen more or less an expansion. वो contract नहीं कर पाए, उनका उल्टा expand हो गया debt to GDP. So this shows that India has the capability to make substantial progress towards fiscal consolidation. Next slide, please. Now, in addition, India's inclusion in the global bond indices is a massive positive for the debt markets. Now, we've already seen India's inclusion in the JP Morgan Global Bond Index. We had the FTSE inclusion, and now we are on the verge of Bloomberg inclusion next year as well. So, all of this opens the door for steady foreign inflows into Indian debt market. So, in fact, तो आई एम सेइंग नाउ टू एड अप टू व्हाट आई सेड सो फार, आई एम सेइंग इंडिया का डेट इशुएंस थोड़ा कम हो जाएगा, सप्लाई कम हो जाएगी, अपनी करंट डिमांड जो है फ्रॉम डोमेस्टिक डिमांड वो रेजिलियंट रहेगी बिकॉज इकोनॉमी इज प्रोग्रेसिंग इन अ सर्टन पैटर्न लाइक आई सेड, एंड फॉरेन डिमांड और आने लगेगी फॉर ऑल ऑफ दीज बॉन्ड्स इन इंडिया. सो योर डिमांड विल कीप इंक्रीजिंग, your supply is going to be more or less decreasing. तो lower supply, higher demand, prices ऊपर, bond yields lower. So this is the simple economics behind all of this. Now, in fact, this year also, despite of net outflows from the equity market, we have seen steady inflows into the Indian debt markets. Now, these inclusion in global bond indices will continue to attract foreign capital, supporting demand in the Indian bonds. So now, what more? Currently, foreign investors are holding only 2% of India's bonds, which means India's debt market is still very underinvested by foreign investors. There's a lot more room for growth here, and which also means कि potential inflows और भी ज़्यादा हो सकता है in the future. So now, as we wrap up today's conversation, what have we learned? First off, predictions often fail in the short term, but in the long term, but the long term trends have a way of holding it true. So the short term market moves, your GDP forecasts, your inflation surprises, they can all be a bit noisy. But if we zoom out, the broader economic and the market trends tend to remain more or less consistent. हमने समझा कि प्रेडिक्शंस अक्सर शॉर्ट टर्म में फेल हो सकते हैं, लेकिन लॉन्ग टर्म ट्रेंड्स में दे आर मोर और लेस कंसिस्टेंट. That's why, as investors, it is crucial to base your portfolio on a short term. I mean, it's critical to not only base your portfolio on short term outlooks. Sure, pay attention to near term noise. ध्यान देना चाहिए कि अभी क्या हो रहा है, क्या नहीं हो रहा है. But we should position ourselves for the bigger game, the long term trends that remain strong despite any short term volatility.
To take from like what from Sneha said, so from my side, the conclusion is that even from the equity side or gold side, I think all the asset classes today are positioned for reasonable returns, which was not the case last year. And only safe haven assets like gold and silver delivered. But this year, we believe that equity markets are at a juncture where they are showing some long-term reasonable returns from this position versus what they were doing last year. So if your clients are under invested in equity or they are interested to take exposure, this is the best time to do that because the valuations look quite appealing, at least in other than index stocks. And that is how we have been asking our partners to do. Thank you.
Thank you for listening and joining us today. Now we open the floor for
Yeah,
Q&A. Over to you, Bijal.
yeah. So thank you very much, Ketan and Sneha, for wonderful insight, full presentation. We already got couple of questions, in fact, more questions, and I would like to request all the participants, whatever you are having questions, you please write in a chat box, and questions one by one we will take this up. So before other questions comes, Sneha, there are a couple of question. Uh, Number one is although you have already mentioned describe about guild fund, but there if you can share your some more updates on guild fund performance and the outlook for near future. So
So,
that is number one.
mhm. So, see, so for our dynamic bond fund, for that matter, our view, the way we have designed the fund, we do not react to the daily noise. We don't react to what is going on a daily basis in the market. The dynamic bond fund is a strategic fund. Of course, we keep ourselves agile. अगर मार्केट में कोई मूवमेंट आ रहा है, अगर हमको स्ट्रक्चरली हमारे रिसर्च से, हमारे एनालिसिस से अगर हमें लग रहा है कि markets are moving in a different direction or they are changing the course from what we were accumulating so far or what we had our assumptions about so far. अगर हमें directionally change दिख रहा है तो we act on the portfolio, but we don't act on it on a daily basis. This is not a trading portfolio. This is a long-term investment. And our philosophy with dynamic bond fund is primarily capital protection first. So whenever there is a negative momentum, the first thing we do is we try to protect our capital. We position ourselves in a way that we protect the capital as much as we can to limit the amount of losses that the portfolio is likely to face in the near term. But we base our portfolio decision, our portfolio is positioned based on our long term estimates, which is what I just briefed you guys about. Ki in the medium to long term, see, in the near term there is going to be noise. The noise is the yields have already reached 556, 560 also for that matter. Agar, sorry, 660, 656, 660 for that matter.
Mm.
When yields are that high, and it's across the curve. 5 year देख लो, 10 year देख लो, 15 year देख लो, 40 year देख लो, everything has just moved up. Like I said, RBI ने रेट कट किया, but bond market में वो रेट कट दिख ही नहीं रहा है, yields में वो रेट कट दिख ही नहीं रहा है. We expected कि OMO announcement से हमको थोड़ी बहुत relief मिलेगी, but that has not happened in the market so far. The broader reason is उल्टा sell off हो गया. People sold, book profits, sell, prices keep going down, and your bond yield started moving up. Now ये क्यों हुआ? Because we've seen some foreign banks exit the market because they have a certain threshold in their books. The bigger driver here was the dollar rate, the INR to dollar rate. I see we had another question on INR outlook and what is driving INR and why isn't RBI intervening. So RBI did try its best to intervene. For that matter, they have also announced a $3 billion ka FX swap. So the RBI is currently trying to handle liquidity also. with the OMOs and the FX swap. They're trying to control the currency also. They're trying to do their best. They're intervening as much as they can. But rupee ka depreciation is currently India's only defense against these uncertain tariffs. अगर आपकी करेंसी थोड़ी बहुत depreciate होती है in the global markets, now drawing the basics here, because of tariffs from the US, some of our exports have faced some headwinds. हमारे exports अब उतने strong नहीं रहे as they used to be, right? तो to find alternatives, कि आप अगर यूएस को एक्सपोर्ट नहीं कर पा रहे हो तो आप किसी और कंट्री को एक्सपोर्ट करो. टू फाइंड दैट ऑल्टरनेटिव यू वुड वांट योर गुड्स टू लुक चीपर एज कंपेयर टू अदर इकोनॉमीज, राइट? सो उसका नेचुरल हेज ये है कि आप अपनी करेंसी को थोड़ा डिप्रिशिएट होने दें. अगर आपकी करेंसी डेप्रिशिएट होती है तो फॉरेनर्स को या दूसरी कंट्रीज को आपके गुड्स सस्ते लगते हैं. So your demand is likely to look more lucrative if foreigners start, if your goods look cheaper in the foreign market. So we are trying to attract more export potential, which is why we are letting the rupee depreciate to some extent. Now this is some part of it which is intentional. It's a natural hedge. RBI is intervening. They're trying to do their best wherever they can, whenever they can. But the FII is selling, like your foreign investors ka exit is continuously adding pressure to rupee. So there's only so much RBI can intervene. There's only so much RBI can do. And what they can do, what they will do, or what they should do is completely up to them, and it's a completely debatable topic. But for that matter, we don't see the currency risk to be extremely high. See, over a period of time, we've seen rupee depreciate anyways. Like in my long-term estimates, like I said, I expect it to depreciate up to 2% every year. So rupee depreciation, while that has been a problem, bond market में भी उसका impact हमको दिख रहा है. अगर ये रुपी का या फिर टैरिफ रिलेटेड अनसर्टेनिटी इतनी नहीं होती, ये 125 बेसिस का रेट कट जो आरबीआई ने दिया है, वी वुड हैव सीन सम इम्पैक्ट इन द बॉन्ड मार्केट एज वेल. सो गोइंग फॉरवर्ड आई एक्सपेक्ट दिस ट्रेंड टू रिवर्स. लाइक आई सेड, स्प्रेड्स बहुत हाई हैं, दे वेरी अट्रैक्टिव. इतना हाई स्प्रेड्स पहले कभी रहे नहीं है. Going forward, we expect the spreads to come back to its normalcy, not their all-time high levels. We expect it to come back to normal. जब spreads contract होंगे, curve नीचे आएगा. Curve अभी ऐसे जा रहा है, gradually it will flatten. We'll see the curve flattening. जब ये होगा, तब rates भी नीचे आएंगे. So my medium to long-term view is more or less कि yields will flatten and rates will come down. Cuts, no cuts is a completely different issue. I don't, in our internal estimates, we don't see another rate cut happening this year by RBI. And with Fed also, Fed did deliver another 25 basis point rate cut, but they've now set the bar very high for upcoming rate cuts. They are certain कि unless they are जो भी ये कंसेशन वाले रेट कट्स करने थे 25 बेसिस डिस्पाइट ऑफ द इकोनॉमी नॉट नीडिंग अनदर रेट कट, दे हैव एक्सप्लिसिटली सेड कि अभी और कोई कंसेशनल रेट कट नहीं होएगा. दे विल बी इन अ वेट एंड वॉच मोड. But I think apart from Japan, everybody else is either in a easing cycle or in a hold cycle. So when a cycle is like that, ग्लोबल हेडविंड्स जैसे जैसे थोड़ा थोड़ा ईज होने लगेंगे, डेट मार्केट विल आल्सो स्टार्ट नॉर्मलाइजिंग.
Yeah, so the next question is to thank you, Sneha, for the brief answer. The next question is to Ketan. Some of our partner wants to understand our strategy in ESG fund, and a couple of questions we have received why we are not promoting other funds which are doing really very well, which is ESG and MAF. But that answer, let me give it to all the participants. Okay, it's not that we are promoting one particular fund, but we have changed our strategy and gradually we are going in the market and we are promoting all our fund. Since ऐसा नहीं है हमारे पास कुछ बहुत सारे कुछ 100-200 schemes है, we are already only having 14 funds including all ETFs and gold fund and fixed income. तो डेफिनेटली हम उसके ऊपर डिटेल में बात करेंगे, वन ऑन वन भी करेंगे, एंड इन आर ऑल कंपास सेशन वी कैन कंसिडर, हम लोग उसमें फंड्स के लिए ऊपर भी बात करेंगे. बट द क्वेश्चन इफ यू कैन थ्रो सम लाइट ऑन ESG strategy and going forward this thing, Ketan.
Yes. So ESG fund actually is one of the funds where we look at the governance filters first. So we look at financials, but the governance things come first. So after the stocks, जो stocks है वो governance filter qualify करते हैं, environmental और even social angle अगर वो cover करते हैं कि उसमें वो filter होते हैं, उसके बाद हम वो stocks को consider करते हैं portfolio में लेने के लिए। लकीली क्या होता है कि जिसमें गवर्नेंस अच्छा है वो कंपनीज की क्वालिटी बहुत ही बढ़िया होती है, सो दे आर वेरी गुड कंपनीज। सो यू विल सी दैट टिपिकली जिसका गवर्नेंस खराब रहता है वो कौन सी कंपनी आती है। बेनिफिट है कि जो वो फिल्टर से हम लोग जब कंपनीज चुनते हैं, दे आर ऑटोमेटिकली ऑफ सो हाई क्वालिटी दैट अक्रॉस द पोर्टफोलियो the companies have one very good earning growth and very good ROE. So these are the two things on which the portfolio has been constructed, and it tends to do very well in the cycle where there is a lot of uncertainty in the economy and there is a lot of cyclical slowdown. In that case, these high quality companies tend to deliver a very good return. And on an aggregate, we also say that to many of our partners, when clients often ask that they want to buy and hold some companies which are high quality and just write the whole thing, ESG fund offers automatically that set of companies कि जिसके अंदर काफी हाई क्वालिटी कंपनीज है, आप पोर्टफोलियो का एक बार गो थ्रू करेंगे। सो दैट इज अ वेरी गुड प्रोडक्ट टू टेल दे शेयर विद द कस्टमर योर क्लाइंट्स। they'll understand that they'll actually getting benefit of holding by quality companies for long term.
Ketan, two more questions. One is, what is your understanding on mid and small cap for next 12 months? And the other one is on ethical funds, since we completed 1 year and the NAV is almost at par. So what is your view going forward for ethical?
So, talking about mid and small cap is a large universe. I cannot simplify it by just looking at headline index. आप अगर इंडेक्स भी देखेंगे मिड एंड स्मॉल कैप का, इसमें 150 या 250 कंपनीज होती है। सो एक साल का आउटलुक देना, इट्स नॉट राइट थिंग टू डू। If I were to ask, let's say, if someone was to ask whether he can blanket invest in small cap index or mid cap index, my advice would be the valuations are little high there. You have to be very careful कि आप वहाँ पे किस फंड्स में डाल रहे हो या एडवाइस कर रहे हो। वहाँ पे ऐसे फंड्स देखने चाहिए, या जैसे हम सोचते हैं हमारा स्मॉल कैप फंड में हम क्या कोशिश कर रहे हैं, एक तो पोर्टफोलियो लिक्विड चाहिए। द स्टॉक्स द फंड ओन्स have to be liquid, because whenever there is a risk of slowdown, there will be a sharp selling in that, and these stocks are not usually liquid, number one. Number two, the valuations are too high to make a sufficient return. So you escape that risk by concentrating on those sectors or those stocks जहां पे वैल्यूएशंस फेवरेबल है और जहां पे अर्निंग ग्रोथ भी आ रही है और वैल्यूएशंस फेवरेबल है। अनफॉर्चुनेटली होता यह है कि बिकॉज ऑफ साइज ऑफ द फंड्स अक्सर क्या करते हैं, 150-200 स्टॉक्स लेते हैं, तो उन्हें ये चीज मैन्यूवर करते नहीं आता है। दे कैन नॉट गो इन एंड आउट ऑफ स्टॉक्स ओवरनाइट, सो दे आर एंड अप विथ ऑल द ओवर वैल्यूड स्टॉक्स एज वेल एंड द अंडर वैल्यूड एज वेल, विच डाइल्यूट्स द परफॉर्मेंस ओवर अ पीरियड ऑफ टाइम। इसलिए द फंड्स लाइक वी इन क्वांटम स्मॉल कैप फंड वी टिपिकली होल्ड 50 to 60 stocks. We have written in our SID that we will not own more than 60 stocks ever, and that will give you a good exposure to only those names where we have done a good research and we believe they are very favorably valued in any types of markets. So in that case, the short answer will be that valuations are high. I'll go cautious on investing into that space. But if you are looking at some funds which have positioning in a higher quality names, they will still tend to outperform in general in long term. So you can consider slowly allocating those funds. Even today, because the valuations have come off a bit, we are getting more cautiously optimistic about those small and mid cap. And we are also saying that quantum small cap can be looked at if someone is under invested in small cap funds. And regarding the ethical fund, last 1 year, ever since we started, the markets have not done much. So even if you see the benchmark, the fund has done better than the benchmark, but the index itself has not done so well. Last year, the entire rally has come from the banking sector or one or two names like Reliance or Bajaj Finance or a couple of names. So it was a very narrow rally where many funds who are reasonably diversified, they have not been able to generate a very high return. Although we have as versus the benchmark, it is not a bad return at all. We have probably be ahead of it. But nevertheless, what it means is that markets have not been conducive for making a return in that period, and we are hoping that long term the returns will be very in line with what is likely to be the equity returns.
Uh, Thank you, Ketan. Sneha, one more question for you. The question is 2% foreign bonds investment does create such impact. Also, can we expect normally by March?
So I'll take the second question first. Like I said, near-term view is largely dominated by how these tariffs roll out, where the liquidity situation pans out. ओएमओ कितना करता है, कितना डीप करेगा, अभी उसने 1 ट्रिलियन के आसपास अनाउंस किया है. We anticipate it. We believe that we would need more, another trillion, another 1 trillion to 1.5 trillion of OMOs in the market. OMO is positive for India bonds, bond yields, because they tend to go down. We've written a detailed piece about it. You can check out our website and you can look at our DMO. In that, we have mentioned what OMOs are and how are they interlinked in the current economy. Now, moving to the 2%, is that really significant? इंडिया की करंट जीडीपी रफली ले लो, से ऑलमोस्ट 4 ट्रिलियन है डॉलर्स, यूएस डॉलर्स, 4 ट्रिलियन यूएस डॉलर्स के आसपास है. एंड इसमें से आई एम सेइंग वी हैव ऑलमोस्ट 2% का कंट्रीब्यूशन कमिंग फ्रॉम बॉन्ड्स. लाइक फॉर दैट मैटर ओनली 2% इज कमिंग टू बॉन्ड्स. अगर तो मतलब रफली वो कितना, इट्स मोर और लेस वेरी क्लोज टू 0.9 ट्रिलियन. अगर 0.9 बिलियन, सॉरी, नहीं, हाँ, 0.9 ट्रिलियन, आई एम सॉरी, तो 0.9 ट्रिलियन, तो 0.9 ट्रिलियन के आसपास का होल्डिंग है. उसी को अगर तुम एक्स्ट्रापोलेट कर लो फ्रॉम 2%, इफ इट गोज टू लाइक 5%, अगर जस्ट बाय एडिंग लाइक एक्स्ट्रा 3%, we go up to 4 to 5 trillion as the economy progresses. I'm saying as a percentage of India's economy, if we move forward, ये जो अभी 0.9 ट्रिलियन है, दिस कैन गो क्लोज टू 2.4 2.5 ट्रिलियन. दैट्स अ बिग नंबर. वो छोटा सा ट्वीक विद द इकोनॉमी ग्रोथ, विद द इनफ्लोज दैट वी सी across global economies and global financial assets, अगर हम वो ग्रोथ को कंपैरेटिवली डालें तो दैट नंबर बिकम्स रियली ह्यूज. उतना इनफ्लोज अगर इंडिया अट्रैक्ट कर भी पा रहा है, सो इट्स अ बिग डील.
Thank you. Uh, Ketan, a couple of follow-up questions are for mid-cap and small-cap. What is your suggestion to invest in mid-cap and small-cap for wealth creation in long run? And if yes, is it through SIP or a lump sum?
So SIP or lump sum, it's a function of one, the whether how your cash flow is available. If you have cash flow available, you will make lump sum. So that is how you advise. But then depends also on the valuations. So if you are asking that if your clients are today not invested in small cap at all, so if you are looking at, just I can speak for our fund, what we believe is that based on the our estimates and our valuations, we believe that at least some portion of the money lump sum can also be invested today. And we believe that the long term returns are a function of earning growth. And if a large cap funds can, if large cap companies can also have earning growth, it's just like that. Mid and small cap companies also will have earning growth, and the returns will be in line with that. So if the risk appetite of your client is higher, in that case, you can allocate more money towards that. However, it is not just depend, it is not to do with that whether wealth creation will happen or not. It is inevitable that if the earning growth will happen in small cap, the wealth creation will happen there. Today, based on the situation around where there is a slightly cautious outlook and the valuations are high, we will still recommend a caution on that space. And you can only incrementally allocate there and not go very aggressive immediately.
Mm. Thank you. So largely, we have covered all the questions. So would like to thank you all the participants for joining this session. And every month we are doing this, session on different topics. So thank you very much, Ketan and Sneha, for giving your valuable time and presentation. Thank you so much.
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme related documents carefully.